This week on Diabetes Connections, what happens when T1D is one of many chronic conditions? Stacey Abrams was diagnosed with type 1 at age 5, and she has faced a slew of other issues since then. Chronic fatigue, celiac, a long road to uncovering mold and environmental illnesses. She shares the highs and lows of that journey, what helped along the way, and why having a medical team that truly listens makes all the difference. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I am your host, Stacey Sims. I'm always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And a big welcome to September. I have said for the last month that I feel like the end of this summer is like the start of a roller coaster. You know, the part where you click up the track, you're just teetering before you shoot down. And the shoot down part is here. We have a jam-packed fall over here. We have 4 in-person events for the diabetes community and personal life stuff, good stuff, but busy, busy, busy. And wouldn't you know it, my email stopped working last week. On Thursday, I woke up to no email on my computer. I could still send and receive from my phone. But guys, I'm old. I don't really like to do everything on my phone. And while I do have a fabulous podcast editor, thank you, John, I'm a solopreneur. I'm pretty much, just doing this all myself. But when I set up the email years ago, I'd had some help. So I reached out to this gentleman, also named John. I hadn't talked to him in, we think, at least 5 years, maybe 6 years. And as of this recording, and I am recording over the Labor Day weekend because that's how crazy the end of last week was, still not resolved. So if I owe you an email, I'm really sorry. It's coming. We're working on it over here. But what a mess. Okay, so what are the 4 in-person events that I mentioned? Mom's Night Out Minneapolis is in less than 3 weeks, September 19th and 20th. We've got Mom's Night Out Phoenix, October 24th and 25th. And 2 new Club 1921 dinners in Charlotte. I had a lot of questions about Club 1921 after mentioning it here next week, so thank you so much for that. It is not on the website yet. You are not missing it. I may have mentioned it on social media, but I think only on LinkedIn and in the very local closed Facebook groups here in Charlotte. But stay tuned on that. We're bringing it to more cities next year. There will be more information soon. These are very small events, but they are for the community. They are for caregivers of kids with type 1, and they are for adults with type 1. And the one in Charlotte had a wait list within 48 hours. So when we announce it in your city, do not miss out. I'm so excited to be moving into more in-person events because if you know the story about how the podcast got its name, Diabetes Connections comes from a presentation I did 2012, 2011, all about making diabetes connections in real life and why they're so important, how to do them. I think it was called Diabetes Connections, Why We Need Them, How to Make Them. And that has really been my passion all along. All right, but the podcast continues. My guest this week is Stacey Abrams, not the Georgia politician, but you heard a bit about her in the opening tease. And this is about what happens when you're diagnosed with more than type 1. Stacey reached out wanting to share her story in the hopes of helping other people who are dealing with a lot of chronic conditions. I asked one of her doctors to join us as well. Dr. Monica Schwartz is her endocrinologist. You'll hear from her during the interview. And it may be obvious, but I think this is important to say before we jump in. This is one person's story. We talk a lot about here that if you're interested in what you hear, you need to take that information to your doctor. I am talking to one of Stacey's doctors, as I said, but we're not doing a deep dive here into the causes of chronic condition or treatment, such as the hyperbaric chamber, which has some unique risks, especially for people with type 1. I do think it's important to share stories like this without feeling like I have to cite a study or fact check every statement the individual is making. These anecdotal stories are important to our community, and I'm really grateful to Stacey for sharing hers. But I do want to state, and this has nothing to do with Stacey's particular story or how she shares it. I want to be clear about that. I just think in this day and age, I need to say out loud, we need to rely on our medical experts, on the evidence-based medical knowledge that is out there, and the sourced research to treat our own individual situations. All right, our conversations right after this. At one of our recent Mom's Night Out events, the Omnipod team was on site asking moms about their experience with the Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery system. It was so much fun. And it was great to hear what the moms have to say. Here's what Angela, mom to Dominic, told us.
My son is 10 years old and he uses an Omnipod 5. It's the only pump he has used since he was diagnosed. It's been a life-changing piece of equipment for him to have. And he's a competitive swimmer. He is able to keep it on in the pool and we don't have to worry about disconnecting. So we absolutely love Omnipod and it has really just made a big difference in his life.
Want to try Omnipod 5 for yourself? Request a free Omnipod 5 starter kit today by visiting omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Terms and conditions apply. Eligibility may vary. Stacey Abrams, Monica Schwartz, welcome to Diabetes Connections. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you spending some time. I look forward to hearing your story, Stacey. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Before we jump in, would you mind just telling me a little bit about yourself? And Dr. Schwartz, let me start with you. Just tell me about your practice. I assume you're still seeing patients, all that kind of stuff.
I see patients. Right now, I'm at the NYU Women's Center for Women's Health. I have a general endocrine practice, but I have known Stacey, the patient, for many years. She's been with me even from my prior employment at Westchester Medical Center. And I feel really lucky as a physician to sort of experience so many phases of life through Stacey's development. And you were a young woman, and now I would say we're both squarely not as young. And we went through it together, which is really an amazing experience.
Yep, I hear you. Stacey, tell me a little bit about yourself. We're going to talk a lot about your experiences, but would you mind telling me when you were diagnosed, that sort of thing?
Sure. I was diagnosed at age 5, and that was almost 41 years ago now. So, I was in kindergarten, and it's just amazing to me. I mean, they told my parents, don't worry, there'll be a cure in 5 to 10 years back then. But it's just amazing, the technology through the years. And I always think my life would have been so much easier and different, and my mom would have been less stressed had this Dexcom been available when I was a kid and the technology been what it is now.
Do you remember anything about your diagnosis? 5 is really little.
Oh, no, I have vivid memories because, I was very ill. I was always very thirsty, and I was waking up to pee a lot in the middle of the night. And I was just getting very sick with all sorts of ear infections and things like that. My mom happened to have strips and just had this feeling that, and tested, and my sugar level was very, very high. And then when we had an appointment with the doctor, my doctor at the time, I remember him saying I had to go to the hospital, and I thought this was a good thing. I was very excited. And I went skipping up the steps. My brother was having a play date. He's 4 years older than me. So he was 9, and he was at a friend's house, and I went skipping up the stairs, and I said, "Guess what, Scott? I'm going to go to the hospital." And his face sort of dropped. I remember at 5, his face dropped, and he's like, "You are?"
Oh.
And I was thinking maybe this isn't such a good thing. So,
wow.
and then I was in the hospital for a full week. Now I think they let you go within a day, or did they keep you overnight now?
We stayed in for 3 days. That was about 20 years ago. But most of it, to your point, is about education. They were able to stabilize. I mean, my son was pretty early diagnosed. So it varies, but a week is definitely a long time.
Right. And my class sent me this book that I still have where everyone drew pictures and said, feel better.
Wow. Yeah, I'm curious to have strips or anything of that kind around, like you said your mom did. It was pretty unusual. Did you have any history of type 1?
My grandfathers both had type 2, and these were the urine strip.
Right. Yeah. Olden days of diabetes.
Yes.
Do you remember when you started getting what we think about as more modern technology? I assume blood sugar meter, maybe the late 90s. But when did you find CGM?
Oh, I didn't get on the CGM till 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, in 2014, 12 years ago. 2013 was when I started on the CGM, and I started on an insulin pump in 2001, right after I graduated from college. I was very self-conscious about the idea of wearing a pump. It was funny, when I was in college, I was very self-conscious. Like, the boys aren't gonna, like, guys aren't gonna like it. I felt very self-conscious, and then right when I graduated from college, I kind of went on it. And in my dating, I never ever had an issue where someone was like turned off or something. And even if they weren't the right person anyway. But I never ever like had issues with it. But I really held out because I felt so
Yeah.
self-conscious about the idea.
So common. So common. Let me ask you, Dr. Schwartz, let me bring you in. So you are obviously were not her endocrinologist as a child. When you have an adult who is diagnosed as a child who comes into your practice, like what do you do? What are your first thoughts and reactions and interactions with that person?
So I think when I meet somebody who's had a chronic medical condition since childhood, there's often a wariness with medical providers. They've been there, they've done that, and they're ready to tell you everything. I try to sort of stay back and just listen at first and kind of see what's going on. There's usually a reason that they're coming to me because often kids will stay with their pediatric endocrinologist for a long time. There's like this sort of young adult transition period. And unless there's something acutely changed that we need to address that second, I try to be really gentle that first visit and get to know them and see like, okay, what are your supplies? What do you need today? And then kind of allow it to go from there. And that's really the truth. I think, especially if you've had diabetes since you were a kid, you wouldn't be sitting in front of me if you didn't know what to do. So I'm really there as sort of a guide and maybe make suggestions. Sometimes I know something that might help and sometimes I don't. But I think that change from pediatric to adult is really a big one because often that's a change from like a parent doing a lot of stuff to you doing it. And I try to be really like here's my info. I know this might sound a little like I said, you might maybe next time something happens, you might not need to call your mom. Maybe you can call me. And I think sometimes that's appreciated, sometimes not. But I think that's important. That's part of growing up and having someone else that you can depend on. Because when you have diabetes, like something always happens, pharmacies close down or your insulin gets left in someone else's car, like stuff happens.
Yeah.
It always happens on the weekend, but it
Oh, yeah.
happens.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I'm glad you say all that. My son is 20 and he's going to stay with his pediatric endocrinologist for a few more years. But he already asked me. He asked me recently. He's like, how are we going to do this? And I'm like, what do you mean we? Like, you're going to do it. Right? And he's like, and he really is 100% independent in his care. But he was thinking like, how do I find an adult? How do I find someone who's going to talk to me the way that I'm used to, which is basically, I'm fine, leave me alone, I've got this. But be a good sounding board and write my prescriptions.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's a relationship like any other, right? Sometimes, there's a little confrontation. Sometimes there isn't. That part is different than just, writing prescriptions. But
Yeah, sure.
That's the fun part, I think, about being an endocrinologist is that you get to meet people from all different walks of life and different situations. And sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're sad. And because, diabetes just doesn't go away, you get to be with someone, their whole lives, which is an amazing experience.
Stacey, so diabetes is not the only challenge that you have faced. Tell me a little bit more about what has happened.
Yes, growing up, I had type 1 and I was very active as a kid. I was involved with dance and theater, and dance was my passion in life. I didn't let diabetes stop me from anything kind of thing. Like I went to sleepaway camp every summer. I traveled on travel tours. I studied abroad in Madrid my junior year and traveled all over.
Wow.
And then when I was in college, I went off to college. I went to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. I took a flu shot and had a very bad reaction to the flu shot. And then I also started getting all these frequent infections, and I was constantly on antibiotics. I finally had my tonsils removed because I had strep throats just frequently for 3 years of college. And that sort of spiraled my whole health downhill. I never got strep again. But sort of if I could go back in my life and redo something, I would never have gotten this tonsillectomy because it sort of really messed my whole system up. And I started having all sorts of GI issues, and I started having debilitating fatigue. I managed to graduate on time, but I was very involved in, I thought I was going to go to law school, and I was very involved with a lot of dance and things that I had to sort of scale back on a bit. But I was going to all sorts of doctors all over,
Hmm.
and no one could really figure out what was going on. Then I found out right after I graduated that I had celiac disease.
Right.
So I was completely relieved, thinking, okay, I can go on a gluten-free diet and that will solve all my issues. And it did help some. I managed to get a great job in marketing in New York City, and I worked for a year and a half, but then my health kept getting worse and worse and worse with debilitating fatigue, I'd get dehydrated all the time, and I was subsequently diagnosed with orthostatic hypotension, dysautonomia, POTS, and chronic fatigue syndrome.
What is POTS? I hear that a lot, but I don't really know. Would you mind explaining it, or Dr. Schwartz?
Sure, it's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's where your body can compensate when, like, to postural changes. So when you go from lying down to sitting to standing, your heart rate rapidly increases and your blood pressure decreases.
Wow.
And so your body just can't compensate well, and you get very lightheaded, get dehydrated very easily, profound exhaustion, fainting. It's a very tough condition to deal with.
And Dr. Schwartz, let me ask you, and I'll get a little bit ahead here, and then we'll come back to Stacey. But so when somebody with a chronic condition like type 1 ends up having all of these other conditions, I would think it's very difficult to treat. Can you talk a little bit about, in general, right? We don't want to get too specific about Stacey, but just like how you approach that and your advice for people who's struggling with lots of chronic conditions like this. Right back to our conversation, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. The all-new Dexcom G7 continuous glucose monitoring system is now available. Powerful and simple, Dexcom G7 is proven to lower A1C and help you spend time in range, all without finger sticks, scanning, or calibrations. There are so many amazing new features to talk about, I'm never sure where to begin. Dexcom G7 is 60% smaller than the previous generation and is the most accurate CGM system out there. The 30-minute warm-up period is fantastic and up to 2 times faster than any other CGM brand. And I love the all-in-one sensor and transmitter. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
Well, I think sometimes we're really quick to be like, well, it's because, your A1C might have been higher this time and maybe it's from the diabetes, but it isn't always. Remember that type 1 diabetes is autoimmune, and that means that you can easily have perhaps other autoimmune conditions that might be associated. For example, celiac. And the POTS, we really don't know that much about. We don't know that, that what keeps us with normal blood pressure and normal heart rate is really, it's a reflex. And so the reflex can go kind of haywire. And we don't know why that happens. We don't know if it's autoimmune. We don't know if it's post-infectious. And I think it can really wreak havoc with just quality of life. So I think it's important to have a good team of doctors, especially for something that isn't common. And that might take time to refer to sort of the right person. Sometimes we're lucky that we have specialists like in a metropolitan area, but sometimes you don't. And I know Stacey has been really all over the country trying to find answers,
Well, and let me ask you about that, Stacey. It sounds like you really did have to dig to find out what was going on.
Yes, for sure. It was a 25-year ordeal, and I was seeing doctors all over the place, and a lot of them were very, very dismissive and gaslighting for sure. And then I was trying different medications, which oftentimes was making me worse, not better. I finally found out after 4.5 years on a wait list for a doctor in Florida that I kept calling and begging, as I was getting sicker and sicker at the Neuroimmune Medicine Institute, said, I really think you have mold and environmental illness. I had never heard of any of this before. This was 6 years ago.
Wow.
I had never heard of any of this before. Sure enough, she tested me and my numbers were off the charts for mold and for all sorts of toxins that were in my system, including large amounts of Agent Orange. How I got that, we don't know. My father was not even in Vietnam.
Wow.
It seemed to have to do with the drinking water in New York. That's what she seemed to feel. But basically, my body couldn't detox well at all on its own. And so she said that she finds that the majority of her chronic fatigue patients, it's really attributed to mold illness. And she referred me to then go to Texas for treatment.
Wow. What is the treatment?
The treatment was detoxing as much as possible. And sauna was the first thing I used, but then hyperbaric treatments was the main thing that really helped my health tremendously. So detoxing, doing a lot with diet and getting your microbiome in order. It also turned out that I had an issue with my colon, which I went to GI doctors for years and years, and none of them ever picked up on this colon issue. And then the doctor that I work with in Texas, Dr. Alfred Johnson, who was an amazing diagnostician as well, he was the one who said, you have a redundant colon, and he said, you need the surgery. And, that was even an issue to find someone willing to do this surgery. But I did that 2 years ago, and that also really helped my health as well.
There was a lot there.
Yes.
Wait. So one of the things, as you listed all of that, when you said hyperbaric, what is that? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So that is a pure oxygen treatment. It's a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. You basically go lie in this machine. It sort of simulates diving. Yeah, it's sort of like the same as like going scuba diving is what they compare it to, but your body's getting 100% oxygen in there. And it's mostly used for the two things that insurance will approve it for are burns and amputations. Like if you diabetic, if you lose limbs, they'll cover it, and for burns. But they're finding that it really helps for so many conditions, including strokes, autism, emotional issues, chronic fatigue, getting rid of toxins, POTS. I mean, it helped my POTS condition tremendously. It was a game changer for my POTS. But the drawbacks are it's very costly, and unfortunately I'm on Medicare for disability, and unfortunately Medicare will not cover it at all. So it is a costly treatment, but it really was a real game changer for me. I mean, it took a long time, but it really did help me. And you have to be careful with diabetes with going in it, because it actually does really lower your blood sugar a lot. It's a little bit of a nerve-wracking thing as the diabetic, because for the hour that you're in the chamber, you don't have access to I have the Dexcom on me, but you don't have access to the machine. You can't even have the machine sort of in the room because of all the electrical fields in there. So it's like while you're in there, you have to leave your Dexcom in a locker, kind of the data part in the locker. And then, the big nerve-wracking question was, what if, God forbid, you go low in there? What do you do? And because it takes 15 minutes to depressurize you to bring you back up. So thankfully, knock on wood, thankfully, I never had any issues. Like I've always had a snack right before I go in. And then I'm in there for an hour.
Yeah.
Some people do an hour and a half, but I just felt with the diabetes, like I'm just going to stick with the hour.
Right.
So.
Okay. Monica, can you weigh in on this? Tell me about the hyperbaric chamber for these treatments.
Well, I'll be honest, I really only know it for its traditional use for wound care. So yes, for really like non-healing wounds of all sorts and for burns. So that's what it's traditionally used for. But it is true that for diabetics especially, and that your glucose cannot be low, because once you're in the chamber, there's no quick way to kind of access the patient.
It's like going scuba diving.
Yeah, and there is a requirement, like for many places that's where I'm involved. Make sure that glucose is checked right before, and then every center will have sort of a minimum before you can get in. But it sort of makes sense that it could improve upon more than just wound care, because there's like a healing process going on with the oxygen treatment.
Stacey, how are you doing these days?
Oh, much, much better. Yes, I really am doing much better. I'm driving again. I just started taking some pure bar classes, and I'm able to get out and about. I still have some medical issues I'm working with, but I am much improved now, and wish I knew about this 25 years ago. And
Monica, let me get your advice here for somebody like Stacey who has, lots of conditions, a lot of hard to diagnose, a lot of hard to treat. If someone's listening and they're thinking, gosh, I can't figure out what's going on with me. I chalked it up maybe to diabetes, but it's got to be something else. What's your advice?
I think my advice would be maybe to make sure people are listening, because I think that, and you can attest to this, Stacey, I think that a lot of your symptoms were discounted, especially in the beginning. And sometimes the answers are easy, but sometimes they're really difficult. I think in Stacey's case, I don't think there was one clear unifying diagnosis, which I think we all wanted, including myself, to be like, oh yeah, if we just fix this, everything else is going to get better. But it really wasn't like that. There were a couple of things that needed to be addressed. And I think that the environmental toxicity is such a unique specialty, right? I mean, I wouldn't even know who to refer you to that. Really, Stacey found that on her own. But I think that was key. And I think communication, like I spoke with her doctors, and we tried to really be on the same page and communicate, even if what we were doing is totally separate. And I think that I've been lucky that everyone has been really easy to communicate with, and willing to communicate.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, because so often, at least in our limited experience, me and my son, we find that a lot of the doctors that are not familiar with type 1 diabetes make some really wrong assumptions. So I'm thrilled that all these doctors talked to you and you had a good experience with that. Is that difficult for you sometimes when someone maybe got one day in medical school on type 1 and then they have a patient who's got it and they have other conditions?
Are we talking about the other doctors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to trash other doctors. I'm saying, like, how do you deal with that?
No, I think it is. I think that, yes, they have no idea. It can be really like complex, right?
Yeah.
But I think Stacey's doctors have all been pretty understanding. I don't know that they have this large population of type 1s, probably not. But I think they understand autoimmune conditions and chronic conditions. And so I think they come from a really good place to understand what it's like. But what I find sometimes is that other providers that maybe aren't familiar is that they don't have a lot of grace with someone who really has to deal with constant fluctuations. And especially when you wear CGM, I mean, every couple minutes, this variability, and sometimes it's wrong. And you can't just jump to conclusions like, hey, was that really like a 50? It could have just been like, oh, I pressed my arm on something, So sometimes I'm like, well, have some grace. You can't be perfect all the time. I don't think that doesn't help anybody, and it's really, really just wear and tear on so many aspects of life. But so I think that part, sometimes it's expressing like, listen, this person is really, really a trooper and does everything they can for their health. And now we're looking at something else to make them feel better.
Stacey, how about you? What is your advice?
Keep persevering and like trust your gut and your instinct and really kind of research things yourself. I mean, I was so unwell before I was diagnosed with the POTS, especially. It was like I knew something was not right with me. I was very active. I loved dance, and I was always taking classes, and I was just dragging myself to work every day. And it was like, from a diabetes standpoint, my diabetes control has always been kind of relatively well controlled. So it was like I knew something was going on. Yeah, even in college, I went to one of these doctors in the city with best doctor plaques all over the office. And he told me, oh, you're just depressed that you don't want to grow up and graduate. And,
Wow.
I left the office hysterically crying and said, trust me, that's not it. He was a endocrinologist by background, and he completely missed the celiac diagnosis. This was in 2001. And I called back and I said, I just want to let you know I was diagnosed with celiac. And he actually picked up the phone and said, glad you figured it out, and hung up on me. And,
Oh, gosh.
it's like I dealt with so much gaslighting always from these practitioners. And so it's bad enough to be sick, but then to have to deal with all these people who, it's like a lot of them especially, who just didn't know what to do with me and were just frustrated. And, instead of just being honest and saying, I'm not the right person, I don't know what to do, it was sort of always just, yeah, it was very tough to deal with a lot of these personalities, and it was very disheartening. And it's like, yeah, it's, I guess when people put ideas in your head, like I even would start thinking sometimes, is this really more of a mental issue? But yeah, I just had to keep trusting my gut. I'm lucky enough that I have a very good support system, my parents and brother, and I have a lot of friends who have always been in my corner as well, and boyfriends. So I'm lucky that way, thankfully.
That's good
Stacey,
stuff.
you're a really vibrant person and you're really smart. And I think that it's really valuable that you kind of say how you came about like feeling better.
Yeah. That's what's wonderful is I know that, everything's not rainbows and
Yeah.
butterflies, but it's wonderful to hear that you persevered and came through this and found the care that you need. And I really appreciate you sharing your story. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And yeah, I just want to really thank Dr. Schwartz, because she's really been super supportive and helpful over the years, and been willing and able to speak with my other physicians. And it's just nice to have a doctor who kind of goes the extra step and, gives, like, I even have her cell phone number. Like, it's nice that she did that years ago, kind of thing. So,
Well, thank you both for joining me. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and stay in touch. Thank you both so much.
yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's so great. So nice to meet you.
Big thanks to Stacey for sharing her story, and for Dr. Schwartz for walking us through a lot of the information there as well. I'll link up a little bit more information as I have it at diabetes-connections.com. Reach out if you do have any specific questions. Maybe I can point you to some research. But like I said, this is really one person sharing her story, which I think is really important in our community. Every story is different. Every person's experience with diabetes is different. So if you heard something here that is helpful, take away what you need to. All right, time is running out to register for Mom's Night Out Minneapolis. Registration closes in less than 2 weeks, and the event itself is September 19th, so don't wait. If you know somebody in that area, please let them know Mom's Night Out is for moms of kids with diabetes and women with type 1. Thanks to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.